Pakistani developers, are you tired of constantly switching jobs or working on boring websites and WordPress plugins? Do you want to leave a legacy, something that you are proud to contribute to? I have good news for you. Codecast Pakistan is sponsored by Shadow Labs, and Shadow Labs is currently hiring. Shadow Labs is an award-winning tech startup formed in 2010. Shadow Labs is on track to disrupt the global legal industry. The best part is that Shadow Labs has its roots in Pakistan. Shadow Labs is the next Pakistani success story. It's like joining Kareem before it was Kareem. Shadow Labs has strong development and operations teams based out of Pakistan, and we are currently looking for developers across Pakistan. So if you are an HTML developer, Laravel developer, or full stack developer, listen here. We are hiring across senior and mid-level roles. We also provide different hiring options, including full-time and flexible part-time roles. If you want to build something that you're proud of, this is the place for you. If you want to be part of Pakistan's next biggest tech company, this is the place for you. Click the link below and fill out the form. And join the legal technology revolution and contribute to Pakistan's next biggest tech startup. Leave your legacy. Welcome to Codecast Pakistan. Codecast Pakistan is on a mission to build the community in the Pakistani tech industry. Our mission is based on the philosophy that community is what leads to collective growth. If we work together, we can grow together. Our focus at Codecast is to bring diverse experiences and perspectives from the tech community. We have a very special guest today. Today's guest is Ali Rehmatullah. Ali has over 5 years of experience in the tech industry in Boston, Massachusetts. Ali has experience at some of the biggest tech companies in Boston, including Wayfair and Athena Health. And Ali is also a community builder. He is currently the host of Building with Barakah, a podcast where he interviews institution builders in the Muslim community. Welcome to the podcast, Ali. Did I do you justice with the introduction, or was I missing anything? I noticed I did miss a few things.
I was just thinking to myself, like, I didn't remember sending you a blurb about the bio. So if you just made that off the cuff, then you did a really good job.
I left the most important part for the viewers. He's also my cousin, but I figured we'd focus on the real accolades first, and then
that's the real accolade,
though. But really, like, realistically, I mean, like, honestly speaking, I think the viewers can really benefit from your experience, because just the journey that you've been through, I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with to succeed going through that journey, and I think, mashallah, you've done it well. So it's something that a lot of people, whether you're in the beginning of your career or the middle of your career, or you have experience, you're looking to move forward, I think Ali can provide a lot of insight and advice on how you can navigate the challenges that you face. And then in addition to that, I think the other side, which is equally important, you have a ton of insight on the community side too. So I want to get to all of that as much as we can. But before we get there, let's start with some context. Why don't you just run us through just your career journey? So tell us about how you got started in the tech industry.
Yeah, so my path was very meandering. And I'm going to give a caveat, because I know that this is aimed for the community in Pakistan. I grew up in the States, and the culture around education and your career path is somewhat different in the States. I think in Pakistan, you are a little bit more locked into your career path. So some of what I'm talking about as I talk about, like, my early career in college, is going to sound very strange. Because I think it's not always been the experience. That might be changing. I cannot say with personal experience whether or not that's the case. So when I started college, I had in mind to be pre-med. I ironically had applied as a computer science major, and I immediately changed as soon as I got in. And it just became very apparent to me very quickly that I did not want to be a physician. And as anyone from the subcontinent knows, that you don't bring your parents' hopes up and bring them down. At the very least, if you're thinking about medicine, keep it to yourself until you've decided for sure.
Especially if both parents are doctors.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. So that was a challenge. Alhamdulillah, like my parents were not, um, they were not strict in that way. It was not a you have to do this or else, and we're not going to pay for college or this kind of thing. They were not absolute in that way. The pressure was more implied. Didn't mean it didn't exist, but it was more of it was soft power, to use international relations jargon. Um, but it was very apparent to me, and it was apparent to me when I was volunteering at a free clinic in Manhattan. So I went to college at NYU, which was a ridiculously expensive school. If you get in and you have a scholarship, alhamdulillah, go for it. There's a beautiful Muslim community there as well. There, the uh, the clinic that I volunteered at was run by NYU Langone medical students, and there was, like, I think one resident who was kind of the main doctor in charge, but the free clinic itself was actually run by the medical students. And I just remember hearing how nightmarishly hard med school was. And I was talking to one of the volunteers there, and I was like, like, how do you do all this? Like, all of the studying and like doing this clinical volunteer work on your weekend on top of all of that. And I still remember what he said. He said, it's really hard, but there's nothing I would rather be doing. And I thought to myself, wow, I don't have that at all.
There's a lot of things
At
I'd rather
all.
be doing.
Yeah, there's so many things, and there was a lot of other aspects and areas where I needed to grow at that time. I think I was very ill prepared for college. Um, I think I have a lot of opinions about making people decide what they want to do with the rest of their life, and making that be kind of the point of the discussion, as opposed to giving the tools to people that can be broadly applicable regardless of where they want to go in. And I think that there's a very clear distinction between those two things, especially in the world like as it is now. Education is changing. That's why I said I know that has been the case in Pakistan, where changing your mind. I changed majors probably every semester. You can't really just do that. But in this day and age, the pace of change has not been keeping up. Like, education has not been able to keep up with the pace of change, and a lot of things are shifting. Um, so I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I ended up leaving NYU and teaching myself to code. It got to a point where I could finish maybe a computer science degree, but then I would have to, pay an extra 2 semesters worth. As I said, it was a very expensive school. I had been introduced to the idea of learning to code from, in computer science generally, from like a few people in our family. I have an uncle on my mother's side who's in computer science, and Omar's brother-in-law, actually, he also taught himself how to code, and he told me about a resource called Free Code Camp. Code Camp, and I think many people who are listening to this may be familiar with them, but they're an international kind of nonprofit, and they teach people to code entirely for free. And they've created a whole bunch of resources. They had an online kind of like Code Academy, like they teach you how to code like in this editor online. At the time when I started, a lot of that stuff wasn't even fleshed out. It was more like a syllabus of what you have to learn in order to understand computer science. And I followed it. There are pros and cons to teaching yourself, because when you're an autodidact, you lack the structure. The syllabus helped, but it's very easy to get distracted. And in some ways, it was good because I pursued those things that interested me, and they give me certain skills that I realized that other engineers didn't have, and certain perspectives that they didn't have. But at the same time, like, I would not even now consider myself the most talented software engineer. My specialty is in front end, and if I'm being honest, like I could not really code a back end that well. Like I could do like a bare minimum with like a lot of boilerplate taken care for me, but kind of that well-roundedness I lost out on because I didn't have that computer science degree. You can make yourself do it too, and there's other alternatives in the West, at least for education. Like there's coding boot camps. Um, but this is one of the pitfalls, I would say, is that your education is up to you. So it's like to make a JavaScript joke, similar to JavaScript, you get enough rope to hang yourself with. It's a coding joke. People who code JavaScript know what I'm talking about. Basically, JavaScript is it's not strongly typed. So like a variable can be a string, it can be a number, it can be anything. So that can lead to a lot of bugs, basically. So the idea is like you get a lot of rope to do whatever you want, but then you can trip yourself with it.
Okay, because of the flexibility too. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So that was my experience. And then, for a while, I was kind of holding a part-time job while I learned how to code. My intention originally was to finish my degree part-time, get a job in New York City. And while I was doing that, I experimented with starting an agency, and I was terrible at sales. That is its own skill set. So that agency didn't really take off, but I learned other aspects of business in kind of a more superficial way, but it was something that became more on my radar and affected, again, that flexibility. It affected my trajectory and the way I think and what I want to do. But at the same time, like it can also diffuse your focus. So I did that. And then eventually I did get a job at Wayfair. And it was kind of the first time that a recruiter had reached out to me. And this is where, like, I mean, I'm a very practicing Muslim, and I believe in rizq and how it can. Sorry, I don't know if you can still see me. My screen just
I could
savered
see.
all of a sudden. Uh, I believe in rizq, and it felt to me like this. I never in my wildest dreams would have thought of going to Boston or applying outside of New York, but I did, and the opportunity that I got there was alhamdulillah, it was like really good, and the salary that they were offering was much higher than I was ever expecting for a first job. And I remember at the time, and maybe we can talk about this a little bit too. Uh, Everyone was telling me to take it, and I had read about negotiating salaries. So I decided to be a bit cheeky and negotiate the salary, and it worked. Alhamdulillah,
Nice.
in that time, in that era, it worked because of the state of the economy and because of where that company was at the time. And then I was there for about a year and a half. I got laid off from that company. They had huge amounts of layoffs, so they hired very quickly, and then they laid off very quickly once there was the COVID-19 basically downturn. And but at the time, I was thinking of moving. The specter of healthcare never really left me. So whether out of guilt or out of a desire to focus in on one industry, I was looking for a job in software in a healthcare company, kind of very intentionally. And at the time, I was actually already in interviews with Athena Health. So, I was laid off. I was already in the interview process. It actually just made it a lot easier to do kind of the main, like, the longer form interviews. And I had a job again, alhamdulillah, within like a month or two. So that was how I got to Athena Health. Fast forward again, I was laid off. So I like to say, I'm not a quitter, not officially, but I was actually at a
You were
point
thinking about
where
it, no?
I was thinking about it. So, like I said, my experience was very varied, and I got exposure to design, I got exposure to business, and I was intrigued by product and product management, and I was intrigued by people. You know, the way I like to think about these different roles is, and the way it's been explained to me the best is, an engineer's job is to build the thing right, and a product manager's job is to build the right thing. So I was much more interested in questions of building the right thing and interacting with customers and with like kind of teams. That at first I was thinking of going into like an engineering manager track, but then I decided, like I really like I'm not that interested in being in the weeds. I'm more interested in kind of having more of a bird's eye view, and I've in part because of you're probably sensing a pattern, this diffused kind of education that I had. I was very good at kind of bringing different types of ideas together, um, and seeing how they connected, which is a different, it's not like a better or worse thing, it's just a different type of thinking to like an engineer where you're just very like involved in a craft, you know. So that was something that I realized at that point. So I was originally looking to transfer within my
I think
role. I was covering my
there's
product
one
man.
question. There's a good question I have for that I think
Yeah.
would be insightful for a lot of the Pakistani viewers, because when you talk about building the right thing, the answer to that question would be very different if you ask, let's say, if I'm talking about developers, if I ask a front end developer or a back end developer what the right final product is, would have very different characteristics, right? It would look different, even if you were told to guide the other person as well.
Mhm.
So, can you provide a little insight on how a developer could approach the question of whether I'm a back end or a front end or I'm that product manager, building the right thing? What does that mean?
Well, so building in the context that I was using it, building the right thing is the job of the product manager. And so,
Hmm.
in terms of deciding what that is, and then the key becomes communicating that to the engineer. Now, the engineer also needs communication skills. You have to be able to understand, you know, what the need is. And in this regard, like I think, you can't really get away from the communication and the people aspect of engineering for any job, because ultimately, like, nobody cares how optimized your for loops are, whether the bubble sort algorithm. They want to know that you can build something resilient that won't fail, but they want to know that because it's going to be used by people and it's going to see a lot of usage. So in terms of, building the thing right? Like when you have a front end engineer, they know their craft. They know how to build a good user experience. When you have a designer, they know or they know how to design a good user experience. A front end engineer knows the best practices of bringing that user experience to life. The back end engineer knows about database migrations. They know about resiliency. They know about, making sure that the application, runs and fulfills its users' needs, right? And there are like in engineering too, there's always going to be trade-offs, right? So like if you uh, optimize for one thing, you have kind of difficulties on there. So like there's, and again, this is where my backend knowledge is fuzzy, but we have this idea of like horizontal scaling and vertical scaling in backend engineering. Those work very differently, and they kind of serve different purposes at times. Like so, if you have an early stage startup with users that are less than 1,000, right? Your backend infrastructure is going to look very different than if you're Twitter, right? Where you have millions of people all the time. So those decisions that you make are going to be different. And they're going to be different because your users are different, right? So building the right thing means understanding the context that you're working with and bringing your craft into play. And it's, the thing is with technical communication, it's always, it's a dialogue, right? Because the business minded person doesn't understand kind of the technical constraints. Like you see this, like I sit in front end, so I kind of see in between both worlds. It's like, why did this button take a week? It's just like, it's not the button, it's everything the button is doing under the hood.
I can draw it right now.
and everything we built before that is not built to help this button out in any like manageable way. So that becomes very, very difficult to translate. And then sometimes, like, you have options that are not obvious to the other person. So, I think what I have found in terms of the best teams and the best mindsets to have are when you give the business person the respect to know their field and what they're talking about. And then the business person gives the engineer the respect to know what their, kind of constraints are and what they're working with. And you kind of come to an understanding. And that also means, understanding like the needs of the other person, but ultimately of the company and of the team, right? So that there's kind of different levels of
Perspective.
stakeholder polls, right? So like I'm coming from large enterprise companies. So a product manager will have usually people above them who, they want to see certain types of results, or they want to see you build products. So one of the teams I was on was a design system team, which is like basically the front end reusable components. And I remember like when our product manager first came in, psychologically there's this want to build a feature, right? Something that someone can see that's like tangible. This is like, look, I'm doing something, right? And then there's like the actual need that you dig underneath it. So one of the things that they wanted to do is they wanted to assess qualitatively how designers and developers see or how designers rather see the components in terms of, because the design system had been going on for a few years and we wanted to make sure it was modern. So we needed to get the perspective of designers who are out there building apps using our design system, like, just qualitative, what they call a top 2 box score, basically. So you have like these, it's super old fashioned versus modern. And then you kind of have like, between 0 and 5, kind of where you lie on that spectrum. So he wanted to build out like a feature on the documentation website. That feature required setting up a database, which we didn't need before. It required, building out like a raw kind of like feature on top of like the page that was already kind of buggy because we made it from scratch, which was also like a decision that came from that type of thinking of like, we need to demonstrate that we're like kind of busy in a way. And I think where things started to shift is when the engineers started to understand like where the person was coming from and get into the bottom of what was needed. So for the top 2 box score, you give a clear idea of like, this is what it would cost us in terms of engineering hours to build this out. However, here are some lower touch options, including even just having a link to a form, right? And just asking like, how does this work with your KPIs and with your stakeholders? Like, how do you want to actually budget the time? Like, we'll give you realistic definitions. We'll try to answer your problem. We'll give you some options so that you understand. So it's not just like, oh, we're not going to do this because it's too much work, right? But it's like you're trying to get at to the source of what the person needs, and then you present potentially an alternative. And I think once you start building teams that have the like openness to be able to have those types of discussions, what they call like psychological safety or whatever you want to call it, and at the same time, like, the kind of our own biases, like we kind of address those, then I think that, things can move quite fast and quite well. But it really does take like a bit of empathy. It takes a bit of empathy, and it also takes proactiveness. I think that's another thing is proactiveness. I think a lot of people sometimes are shy to speak up, or they just want to present problems, right? If you say like, there's an issue here are some solutions, the thing that you're also doing is you're telling the person like, I'm with you, I'm trying to help you out, right? And it's not just like complaints, you know.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Because
it's
yeah.
go ahead, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
I was gonna say it also helps flex a muscle too in your brain because you're evaluating the two options, assessing them in the different ways, and then articulating them to the other person in the best way possible. So it is a good skill to have. I wanted to get your perspective um, on advice for the particular experience, also for the average Pakistani developer as well. So us having been in the industry for some time now, so I've gotten a good idea of the work environment for the average person that's in the tech industry in Pakistan, and I think that your experience and your perspective could be good in shaping how people could approach their career, their learning, or like what you're saying, how they're navigating discussions or just their day-to-day work. So for the most part, Pakistani tech companies, although this is not a general rule, but for the most part, they are software development houses, right? So building product for other companies, typically abroad, but sometimes local. There are a few big players that are whether local or regional that have big products that people work for. But I would say that would be probably 10 to 20% of the industry, if that. So majority are in the software house. So that's the part I want to focus on. So software house, the average developer is probably working, I would say, in a team, not much client facing work, but sometimes you do get client facing work. And then you have the team lead that's working with the client and just getting the specs and building out. Now, the average developer's experience, I'll give you a little bit extra information, is of job instability, right? So it is, I have a job 6 months, a year, have another job, 6 months, a year, have another job, 6 months, a year, frequently. So within the context of all that, there's a lot of instability. There's a lot of like you're not sure. So what results is a lack of commitment. So what would you say when someone is? I guess let's focus on someone who wants to just get better at their craft. So if you're going through this kind of experience, they want to become a better developer. So you mentioned one of the things. Speak out. Talk about what are the different options, maybe for problems that the company or the technology is facing, and give that opinion, which is good advice, I think. What else do you think that people in that circumstance that are just at the bottom or maybe in the middle of this hierarchy of a company they could do?
So I feel like you're asking kind of two questions in one. One is like being better at your craft, and then the
Mhm.
other is kind of more like contextual to the economic situation in Pakistan in terms of like these jobs.
Mhm.
As for getting better at your craft, I can speak more to that. As for kind of the other, that contextual thing within Pakistan, I could give general advice, but I honestly don't know how. I feel like it would be of limited use just not having that context. As for
Uh,
learning your
yeah.
craft, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say I could form out that question a little bit better because I know there's particular experience you have that is valuable for people in that. But let's focus
Okay.
on the learning the craft, and then I'll give you a follow up with that second part question.
All right, sounds good. So for learning your craft, I would say the first thing is just the mindset, you know, and also a long term view. My decision of moving out of software engineering came out of, you know, I had saw even in the States, like there's a certain level of ageism in the industry where when you reach a certain age, if you're not a manager, if you're not kind of at like the upper level, or if you haven't started kind of like your own business, basically, it's very hard to get a job in what they call like an individual contributor kind of role. And I know a lot of people like that kind of work. I would say that for those people, um, you know, probably one of the best things you can do is think about like products, SaaS products that maybe like give you a steady stream of income a month on the side, and just find kind of like problems to solve. But again, like it's very hard to address that without mentioning that you have to start thinking about using another part of your brain, right? As for the technical aspects, again, and this is something people have to think about it, like this is changing constantly. And the universities are not really keeping up, but the resources online are incredible. There's a lot of resources online that are just like they're free or close to free. I mean, I know that the cost becomes more prohibitive in Pakistan, even when it's at the lower end here. But many of these content creators, sometimes, like, if you just reach out to them, and I've seen this, if you reach out to them and you say, like, I love your content and I really want to take this course, but I can't afford it, many of them actually do give out discounts, when they look at your situation, because they understand that, like, it's a global market now, and they do want to help people. So, the resources are there. There's an approach to be always learning, to kind of stay abreast of the news in terms of where tech is now and where it's going. That is an aspect of your job that you have to keep up with as a software engineer. Are there jobs when you work in kind of legacy kind of systems, like, PHP is still used? It's not as common. Is it worth investing your time to become the best PHP developer? Like, you can argue there's people who are still coding in Cobalt somewhere, some ancient legacy system. But it will become increasingly harder and harder to find those jobs. And again, like, this moves fast. There was no such thing as a front end engineer like 20 years ago. There was no concept of that. You were a software person, like, period. Like,
you build code.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's a thing that you have to keep in mind, is that this is a craft that is constantly changing. And if you are thinking about your career 50 years down the line, you have to ask yourself, are you the type of person who will be keeping up with this? Or is there another type of work that you'd rather be doing? And I think that, one of the things to look at, and this is true even as just like an individual contributor as a software engineer, is like these types of communication and people skills and empathy skills. These things are widely applicable, and they will never ever be outsourced or they won't be deprecated, the way a tech stack might be, right? Having someone who can really translate what a user wants clearly and communicate that well is going to be valuable, like, way more than someone who can build an amazing architecture, but they just built the wrong thing.
Yeah.
To
And it's
your
funny,
point.
that was the second half of the question that I was going to elaborate on. So I was going to say how one of the what I have found that, or I don't know if it's a reaction or a pre-existing state, but a lot of the experience of developers or the culture is a lack of emphasis on relationships and communication and understanding that you need to network and build a relationship, and that networking is not just messaging someone and saying, can I have a job? Right? Because that happens.
Networking someone on LinkedIn saying, like, let's have some synergies.
No, but this happens. It's, can I have a job?
Yeah.
Like, no,
This
hello.
happened to
It's, can
me.
I have a job?
Don't do it.
So, yeah, so,
Don't ask me for synergies.
yeah.
I don't have any.
So as we end off, can you just give us concisely your advice on what it means? Because I think this is something that you've done well as well. What it means to build a relationship and network. Like, what does that really mean? What is the core of that, or something that practically someone who has never done it, whose idea of networking is, can I have a job on Netflix, on LinkedIn? That's what they say. Like, how do you transition? What does it mean?
Yeah. I mean, you have to remember that people are human. If you put yourself in someone's shoes, and, like, a bunch of random people message you cold saying, I would like a job, that, like, what does a person kind of do with that, right? You have to think about, like, in your own life, like, your relationships, your friends, right? How do you engage with a person you've met for the first time, right? Like, you want to get to know them. And one of the things that people like is, like, you offer them something of value, right? It doesn't even necessarily have to be like, oh, I'm going to do this stuff for you for free, right? Like it could be, and specifically to like developing your career as a software engineer, one of the things that a lot of people do is that they will create content. That's a big thing, like to teach people how to do things, right? And then and that itself actually develops another skill in communication and in teaching others. There's a saying that you don't truly know something until you can teach it to somebody else. And it's true, because it forces you to really make sure you understand what it is you're doing. If you can't articulate it to someone else, it's hard to say that you've really understood it. And so I guess that's kind of like two advices there. And again, like, relationship forming is you don't just toss like a log over a river and call that a bridge, right? It's not like a bridge over a river and like you just race to the other side kind of a thing, right? It's planting seeds. You're a gardener in this case. Some of the seeds don't take, right? And the seeds, you can water it too little and you can water it too much, right? And sometimes the soil is right, sometimes the season is not right, the timing is not right. There's a lot of like perspectives that like you have to keep in mind, and they're very human perspectives. Like there's plenty of books that you can read on like, just psychology and relationship building, and I do encourage everyone to read widely. But a lot of this is just common experience, So if you are even just like as a parent, if you're a parent, right? Like your kid comes to you complaining about something all the time, like, it's just like, I want this, I want that, like that drives you crazy, right? And as opposed to like your kid's just like, Dad, I kind of want to do something together. Like maybe we can build a go-kart. I have like this plan or whatever. And like, you know what I mean? Like you're kind of bringing something to the table. Like, okay, yeah. Like we can work with this a little bit. Like, okay, I'm busy on this day. I'm working, trying to get that promotion. Alhamdulillah. So that's the advice that I would give is you're gardening. Okay. You're not, you're not soliciting. Don't be don't panhandle. Don't be a beggar, right? That's not. It's also not becoming either. Like you don't want to be in that position, right? You want to be in a position where ultimately you're having partnerships with people. You don't want to be on. You want to reach equal ground with people and at some level, right?
Well said. Awesome. Great advice to end off the podcast. Thank you, Ali, for joining me. I think we definitely need to do a second part to this, because we had a lot that we could have gone over we didn't even get to, but I appreciate you coming.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Pakistani developers, are you tired of constantly switching jobs or working on boring websites and WordPress plugins? Do you want to leave a legacy, something that you are proud of? I have good news for you. Codecast Pakistan is sponsored by Shadow Labs, and Shadow Labs is currently hiring. Here are 3 reasons why the best developers across Pakistan are working at Shadow Labs. Number 1, Shadow Labs was formed in 2010 and has received numerous tech disruption awards. Our unique partnerships with major Canadian corporations has positioned us for global success. Number 2, Shadow Labs is a product company that is disrupting the legal industry in Canada. Shadow Labs is on track to change legal services globally. And number 3, Shadow Labs is the next Pakistani success story. It is like joining Careem before it was Careem. Shadow Labs has strong development and operation teams based out of Pakistan. And there's good news. We are currently looking for developers across Pakistan. Shadow Labs is currently hiring for a few roles, including HTML developers, Laravel developers, and full stack developers. We are hiring across senior and mid-level roles. We also provide different hiring options, including full-time roles and flexible part-time roles. This is not a website or WordPress development job. We are building 3 unique products that will change the world. If you have big dreams and ambitions, this is the place for you. If you want to build something that you are proud of, this is the place for you. If you want to be part of Pakistan's next biggest tech company, this is the place for you. If you are a senior or mid-level HTML developer, Laravel developer, or full-stack developer, listen here. Whether you want a full-time job or a flexible part-time job, click the link below and fill out the form. Join the legal technology revolution and contribute to Pakistan's next biggest tech startup. Leave your legacy.